Here to discuss how education, leadership, and patience will lead to a brighter future for digital assets, please welcome former chairman of COMEX, board member of New York Angels, and former managing director, World Economic Forum, Donna Redel.
So let's all just stand. This is a picture of the Board of Trade, where much of my life, not particularly in the Board of Trade, took place. Why don't we all stand up and raise our arms and pretend we're traders, and this is the way that we communicated. We did it like this, you did your fingers like this, and that's the way that we did it. Okay, perfect. So we're in keeping with experiments, we're going to have a little experiment here today in that I'll tee up some of the issues in a conversation, and then I have special permission from the people of Ethereal that we'll be able to have questions. We'll be able to engage in a dialogue instead of having listened to panels and people lecture you all day. So start thinking about the issues of leadership, education, and building markets, and figure out how you can contribute to the dialogue as I go along. So I'll probably talk for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we can start to engage in conversation. So the three themes that I want to discuss are education, leadership, and building markets. And I feel as if this is a kind of natural theme for me because I've been doing it for 20 years. And before we get started, I just want to make sure that you understand that I was the chairman of the Commodity Exchange. I was not your likely candidate to either be on the trading floor or to be the chairman of that exchange. But under my tenure, we merged with the New York Mercantile Exchange to create the largest physical commodity exchange. And that merger happened because of a little thing that we saw in the future called technology. And the technology that was at that time coming forward was the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, and Reuters had created an overnight trading system called Globex. And then every one of these people on the floor were terrified of that and wanted to make sure it happened only outside of their trading hours with ample time in between, because their livelihoods depended on not only trading in the pits, but in a particular piece of real estate on that pit. Whether Goldman Sachs was on their right or Merrill Lynch on their left made an enormous difference in the amount of money that they took home every single year. So technology really informed that strategic decision of creating a merger, because we envisioned that in a decade, took us a little bit longer, but in a decade there wouldn't be any trading floors. And today, what do we think? There are no trading floors. They're mostly used as backdrop for financial news media, and so that vision was in truth what happened. There are consequences of the disruption, and I just want to point out, when we're talking about disruption and we're talking about changing the financial system or any other system, we also have to think about the people that it disrupts. In the instance of the trading floors in Chicago or in New York, but particularly in Chicago, the ecosystem that was there was not only the people that traded on the trading floors. You had the people that shined their shoes. You had the people that cleaned the trading jackets every day, that parked their cars, that made their lunches, that did every single thing in that ecosystem, and today not one of those jobs exist. So it's incumbent upon us to think about, back to the theme of education, when we're going to be moving these markets forward, how are we going to train, educate, and deploy a workforce that was doing something else or might be doing something in blockchain? So I think that's something that every one of us needs to think about, and we need to be prepared with an answer. And in every one of our different disciplines, how we intend to do that. So that's a question for you, and if anybody later is a little bit brave, they can stand up at the mic and say how they might be doing those things. Also on education, sometimes it's just the day-by-day or small groups of people. So in 2018, I developed and started a course at Fordham Law School and Business School on blockchain, digital assets, cryptocurrencies. I had glazed-eyed students for the first 5 classes. But by class 6, and many of you, Joyce Lay came, Patrick Bertolucci, Aaron Wright, came and spoke to the students and helped them learn what all these digital assets would mean potentially in their futures and for many be able to have jobs. So we will now be having a second course in 2020 on smart securities. So we'll call on all of you again to try and put together curriculums that will be able to move forward the needle and create people that are well educated, or at least getting on the road to education to be able to use digital assets in their jobs and in their legal and business professions. So I think that that's important. Also, trying to figure out how you can bring not only into the safe place of New York, but outside of New York and places that you don't normally visit, conversations relating to blockchain. I had the privilege of going down and visit some friends in Mississippi. And I went there and I talked to Old Miss Law School. And I was really totally surprised at the level of engagement of the students. On the other side, when I was driving through the Delta and saw how really, really poor the poorest state in our union is, and what could we do in the community colleges there to perhaps have initiatives where we use blockchain and created education and gave the top 10% of the people that perform their jobs. Because to educate them without giving them an ability to work in the industry, and as the industry grows, creates more frustration than in fact just being able to do that. So I think that's another specific thing on education. And then, as everybody that knows me, I would say something about women. We went to Barnard College, where I'm a graduate of, and we did a whole day of women in blockchain. We talked of everything from actual coding to art to blockchain to business. So I think it's very important that blockchain figure out and focus on diversity, and how do we make sure that the young women and the women in the industry get visibility so that they can bring along. Remember, 50% of the assets that we're talking about that you're going to deploy, in the end of the day, end up in women's hands, whether through inheritance or through divorce. So it's very important to focus on women, not only because they're 50%, but they're really 50% of the money. So I want to talk about these pits and building markets and leadership. And I think this is an example we have in our industry a little bit of a unique situation as well. So when we wanted to start, originally all these pits here were for agricultural commodities. And when we wanted to start financial futures, there was no market. Nobody really knew what the S&P futures were. They didn't really know what bond futures were or treasury bond futures. But we had a very strong central authority in the exchange, even though every one of the traders were to some extent an entrepreneur, trading or working with family businesses, having a book that they got from their clients. So you had people such as Leo Melamed that could take the guys by the trading jacket and throw them in the pits and say, you need to put your half an hour in today, and everybody had a schedule, and everybody really did it. And in the end of the day, there was a market that now is the largest futures contract, and from that, you evolve the various ETFs, et cetera. So we need to figure out for ourselves, how do we replicate the ability to have this central structure which was here, even though there were very interdependent and intradependent people? How can we collectively work together, even though we are competitors in many instances, to build a market? It's not very easy it's easy for me to say that. It's not so easy to figure out the plan. So I think that that's a key thing in the next year that we should be able to figure out how to do. How do we get people around a table to build a consortium to invest and issue and trade in these digital assets, whether the digital assets are cryptocurrencies or the digital assets are digital securities? So I think that's something we need to struggle with together, because not one of us independently has the answer, but I hope collectively we can start to have a dialogue on some of these specific issues. And I think that's a really big thing. And the other point I want to make, which I'm sure many of you are aware of, but I just want to underscore, is this isn't going to happen in a day. We need patience. We need patience not only in building the markets, Well, we need patience in holding on to some of the digital assets so that the space can grow and as breathing room. It's not a matter of to buy and sell very quickly. A lot of them will not be trading back and forth rapidly until the market has space to grow and get a little bit of oxygen, and where you can then have trading markets. If you remember, if we're talking about digital securities, regular securities trade a lot, but most of them stay in people's portfolios for quite some time. It's the speculators and the high-frequency traders that are making the markets in between. But people themselves hold on to assets for quite a long time. Even assets that we don't think about that we want to securitize, underneath they're there, whether it's your home or your painting or the other aspects of life that we think we can securitize, including debt. So here are some of the questions that I had, and I'd like people to engage in conversation because it's a little boring for me to just talk to you. I'll pretend you're my students in my class, and most of you are smarter in many respects than able to do this. So I'd like somebody to be able to get up and talk a little bit about how they see leadership and what role they play in leadership. Something you've been doing in the last year that reflects a leadership position, or a way in which you think that you can influence other people to get involved in blockchain and cryptocurrencies. Another one that we should talk about is what I brought up before, how do we get a number of startups, all that are short on capital and time, to work together to collectively build these markets so that they individually, as companies grow, and the market grows as well. And then the other thing is to think about how we ensure diversity and how we bring in more people into the industry, both young and old, and people that don't necessarily come in the context of blockchain in their daily lives. They're spread out. So I see somebody's brave enough to have a question. That's fantastic.
First,
Just say what your name is so the other people can know who you are. Fantastic.
my name is Tanya Evans. I'm a tenured professor of law at the University of New Hampshire.
She is a fantastic professor.
Thank you. I appreciate
And
that.
I'm glad she's brave enough to ask a question. It'll be a hard one.
Absolutely. No hard question. I really applaud you, and I loved the suggestion about working at the community college level, and I really want to afterwards talk to you about that.
Sure,
We'd like to
right.
participate. In terms of leadership, we thought it very important at the law school, I'm at the University of New Hampshire School of Law, to create an online professional certificate program, really aligned with some of the things that have gone on at Fordham as well, to empower those in business or maybe law who are working with the ecosystem to kind of bridge the divide. I think the best lawyers are ultimately going to be able to be conversant in technology, and technologists more and more want to know what the legal ramifications are for the technology in their particular discipline. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are about integrating the non-technologists in the space and empowering them with education in order to support the ecosystem as it grows.
Well, I can actually point to something that you do. When I've been at a panel in the audience when you were speaking, and it was an art panel, and Tanya's very, very good at not assuming that everybody in the audience knows what the word blockchain or anything else means. And she reframes, the panelist knows that she's going to do that, and she reframes very clearly and concisely what is blockchain, and makes it so that the persons that are sitting in the audience aren't completely lost from the get-go. And I recommend everybody that is in new situations where your audience may not know what blockchain is, or they may not know what a cryptocurrency is, to find a mechanism, and Tanya, I'm sure, can give you her very, very good slide that you can put into your own words. So I think that some of it is just getting out and talking to people, and we should not assume that anybody understands what blockchain or cryptocurrencies or digital assets are. And that gets to a very important point, which I talk about most of the time, but I don't know why I forgot now, which is terminology. I mean, that is critical. Most panels you go to, or most events that you go to, people use words very, very, very loosely. And that's not, as Tanya, who's a law professor, will know, that's a really dangerous thing to do. Because if you say it's a digital security, that's a whole different thing that it's a digital asset or it's a cryptocurrency. The other day I was at a meeting, a very good roundtable conversation that had supply and demand side there that Cravath led. And when they talked about digital assets, I made the point that are we talking about digital securities or are we talking about digital assets, which includes cryptocurrencies? So I think that terminology is a key thing. And Tanya, maybe you and I can try and take a stab with Joyce, who I just saw come in, and make sure that we have really good definitions. And when people use definitions, that they use them correctly. And that way, everybody's on the same page. Yay, another question. Fantastic. We have 2 out of 2 women so far, so let's go.
Thanks. My name is Shira Frank, and I'm just so grateful you brought up all these themes. In terms of leadership, what we're looking at is how can we prevent and mitigate some of the potential catastrophic consequences of this exponential technology, and you made it very clear as well to be self-reflective and self-aware of the harm, potential harm. And as we started to ask that, one of the possibilities or opportunities we saw is that this technology opens up the possibility of a new relationship between users and companies that maybe the internet, we didn't have the understanding yet to be terrified about how global people might be exploited by this network technology, but now looking back, we can say, whoa, the internet pioneers didn't mean to create surveillance capitalism necessarily, but they did. And so with blockchain, we're asking, how do we actually fundamentally, methodologically, and structurally put companies in relationships with new users? And so to start that out, we're just beginning with let's provide global user research and ethnographic research and discover the narratives, not just the terms, but actually the stories that human beings really have about their needs around power and money, and then help integrate that into what we produce instead of just producing for early adopters and then waiting till eventually, quote unquote, some killer app arrives. That, I think, is a recipe for disaster when re-engineering social and governance infrastructure.
So I think that's a statement and not necessarily a question, but I'll expand on it a little bit. I think that use cases are really important. I think we should start collecting and have available, and I don't know where the website is, but use cases that deal with both what the World Bank is doing in terms of migration, what we're doing in agriculture, what's happening in supply chain, also what's happening in identity on the blockchain. So I think the more use cases we have, the more it becomes tangible. It becomes easier actually to be able to discuss it with people that don't understand what blockchain is. You can have examples. You have examples that are both in the financial world, in the world of the UN and actual companies. I mean, I've seen a list. I think Forbes said the 50 companies that were using blockchain. We need specific, tangible, bite-sized, comprehensible little examples in which to give people. Oh no, James is going to ask a question. Okay.
Well, no, there was another. You said that.
I'm just teasing.
You said I could share about things that helping it, the things that help education. By the way, Donna is my good friend and also my advisor at my company. So I want to share something that I've been doing that I think is a thing that a lot of companies could adopt, and I haven't seen it done before, and it's really working well. So one of the things that happened over the last 18 months is a lot of you know I organized James's Crypto Treehouse. We've got 1,900 people. It's a community, and when it's a crypto community in New York. And when I started my company, I didn't want to talk about my company so much in that group.
So you started another
I started another one. And so basically the thing that I've been doing that's unique is from day one when I started my company, I told my friends, hey, I'm doing this thing. If anyone wants to follow me and interact with me, come on over. And so now I have 115 people in my global liquidity treehouse that every day I interact with, sometimes 20, 30 pages. Technically. So I'm like I'm the CEO and the chief architect of everything I'm doing, and all day long I'm interacting with what I'm thinking about, code ideas, clips from what engineering is doing. And the result is there's this community-based sort of feedback loop from the beginning, and everybody knows what I'm doing because they have input from day one.
I think that and I think that what James is talking about has, two sides to that equation. On the one side, interacting and using whether it's Telegram or other things to be able to megaphone out what you're doing and get input around it. On the other side, I think it is critically important that in the next 365 days, we take ourselves out of where we're comfortable. Like, I'm completely uncomfortable doing this in this kind of setting, and everybody who knows me knows I would be. But we need to take ourselves out of being comfortable. We need to go, like James went to Chicago to a trading thing. So, the people that do real estate need to be not talking to any of us. They need to be going to the real estate conferences. The people that are doing securities need to go there, et cetera. So we need to broaden the outreach. So we're the ambassadors, and we need to have good terminology. We need to have good case stories, and every one of us needs to be out there. Then we create a leadership team. So
just one final thing. I want to be clear that a lot of people know that a lot of crypto-related companies have had Telegram groups. But it's very different to have a Telegram group where what you're doing is you're basically promoting your product. This is not what I'm talking about.
No, why we know that.
I'm saying get in there and interact from the beginning, and what you build will be the result of community. That's all.
Who else? Somebody else? I cannot believe there are only 3 unshy people. Because otherwise I have to do like my law school, a Socratic method. That would be a drag.
Hey, everybody. Hey, James. Thanks for serving as a coach. We met at this conference, and Donna, I think we met very briefly earlier. I am a shy person, so it is a little weird for me to be up here, but this is encouraging, so I appreciate it. My name's Evan Fung. I come from the traditional world of finance, so I wanted to kind of talk about that point and what I hope to bring through leadership and jumping in feet first. I used to work covering stocks, long, short, equities at a couple hedge funds. And I would still say, I'm working on my startup now, which is an emerging fund manager focused on crypto assets and applying some fundamental research and coming up with differentiated ideas to pick winners and losers as we figure out valuation, et cetera, in this space. And I think, what I am both excited and kind of terrified about is how early it is in this space. And for the most part, I think a lot of my friends, some of my family that kind of heard about this new idea that I've embarked on are, politely skeptical is how I would say it. But, even though I've only been full-time in the space for about 4 months, going to conferences, meeting people at meetups, whether it's developers or other members in the community, I've only found support and love. And I think it's been great that the community is both so varied in the background of people that have come here from all walks of life, as well as kind of a shared vision for a better world that we have. So I just want to kind of leave it there. And, for the people that might be listening, whether on the live stream or other people in the audience that have yet to make the jump, I think we're all more powerful than we think at the beginning of the day. So just take some time to think about how you can bring your past experience here and apply it in this world, whether for a project or, something more professional. So thanks.
You're welcome. I think that actually you make a couple of good points, which is, people have experiences in the past that have little or nothing to do with cryptocurrencies that are very valuable in this space today. And there are other times in which people think that they're not leaders, but they don't really understand what leadership is about. I remember years and years ago, I was working on a project in Beirut, and it was at the American University of Beirut. Everybody that was hiring there understood that the people really knew engineering, but what they didn't see evident in their CVs was leadership. And all of the kids there at the university said, well, it's not in our culture to do internships. But when you came down to the ways in which they showed leadership, they had been coaching swim teams or doing other things that were in the community that was part of their culture that they did, and effectively demonstrated the missing quality that the headhunters were looking for in the companies that went there to interview the various students. So I would just look deep into what your background is, and you'll find a lot of encouragement for yourself that you in fact didn't know was there before. And on the point of, there are many, many more people in finance that are here this year than were last year. Hi.
Hi. So what I did is I went to, I live in South Africa. So I'm a chartered accountant by training. I was the CEO of the CSD, the Central Securities Depository in South Africa for 20 years. And then when I read Satoshi's paper, I realized that the monster I had created, which is this central authority to keep the record of ownership of all the transactions in the financial markets, I believe that the vision of Satoshi for decentralization is the way to go. So I resigned from being the queen of the financial markets to join everybody in making a difference. But what I want to explain what I did is that I went to the biggest university in South Africa, and I said, just give me all your professors in a room, and let me tell you about this new technology. So I told them the story about blockchain and how blockchain will change accounting and auditing and tax and law. And none of them could have ever heard of this new technology. So I inspired them, even though I gave them a lot of fear. And they asked me, how am I going to confront my students with this technology? And remember, they're all middle-aged. And I said, I truly believe that you should just cover the financial crisis and what happened, and let the students come up with a solution, because your level of consciousness will not allow you to resolve the issues, but the kids, they will come up with a solution. And because of that, what we agreed as a result of this conversation is to create a course. So I'm now a professor of practice for the university, and my job is not to lecture, but to guide the other professors how to lecture. It's about giving people the ability to know how to fish, and they will then fish. And I think that all of us have got enough knowledge to inspire others. So I don't have to be the academic, I'm not an academic, but I can inspire the academics, give them the tools and the guidance of all the research I've done for the last 4 years, and therefore let them create the courses that they will then give to the students. But that's one aspect. The other aspect I really want to raise is my concern that we keep on only educating those that have been educated. My concern is, what about those kids that have never been given the tools? And I think that we have the amazing opportunity to take those children now and teach them how to code into this new technology and train them. And therefore, they won't need to go to do a PhD in computer science. They can actually be trained in doing something that they will get a job very quickly.
I'm only going like this because I see these 3 zeros that say we have no more time. But I want to just go on that point for 1 second, which is really, really important. I mean, talking to people that are very established in their professions about something they don't understand is very intimidating for them, and they don't respond very well to that. It happened to us when we did derivatives, et cetera. So I know that one of the things that Joyce and I and some others are hoping to do at Fordham Law School, if they approve it, is to take the professor from contracts and bring him into the conversation. Property, why? Because as we saw in Wyoming, they're trying to classify digital assets as property. Bring the person in also for constitutional law, because there is a First Amendment issue that is around. So if we bring all those people in with their disciplines, then they're that went away. But they're very, very smart on those. And so they don't feel intimidated talking about blockchain, because they're just talking about it at first in relation to the thing that they know very well, which is either property or contracts markets, et cetera. So I think we can all figure out ways to make people feel empowered using the education and the standing that they have within their community, and slipping in some knowledge of blockchain and digital assets along the way. So who thought this experiment was good? You have to say yeah. Good. Okay, good. So maybe next year they'll have some more Q&A, and maybe invite me back. Okay, thank you very much.